name is Peter Haley. I'm the moderator of the Winchester Town Meeting, and I'll be moderating the events tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for coming this evening, and especially our school safety officer, the principals of the high school and the middle school, and our state representative, Michael Day, as well as representatives from Winchester Hospital and members of various parts of the community. This is what's meaningful to us in trying to address and solve the problems that face us. We approach our efforts this evening with three goals in mind. One is that we want to be honest about the problems that face us as a community. We want to speak openly and directly about them so that we can begin to address them. We approach these efforts with the ideal of empathy, the fact that we all care not only for those immediate family members who are affected, but for every member of the community. And that's what brings us out here this evening. We approach the discussion with a sense of humility. These are not problems that we can solve by reading any one particular book, listening to any one particular speaker. These are challenges that present no easy solutions, but we are here to recognize them as problems and to attempt to address them. And finally, the main reason for being here is our sense of community. The idea that a problem for one child in the school system is a problem not only for that child and every member of his or her family, but for the problem of the whole community. And only by working together as a community and coming together as we have tonight can we begin to address these problems. I will introduce the four speakers who will speak to us this evening. Each of them will speak for approximately 10 minutes. Following the first two speakers, Senator Lewis and Chief McDonald, we'll have a break for questions. Senator Lewis and the Chief will speak most directly on question 4, the legalization of marijuana, and we'll have a period following their addresses to discuss that. And then Dr. Rothenbach and Mike Duggan will speak to us about the assessment of the Winchester Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the challenges of mental health addiction in general. Our intent is to use approximately 40 minutes of our time here this evening to listen to our speakers and to use the remaining time to engage in a dialogue. We encourage people to ask questions, make comments, and help all of us together address these problems. It's only through that dialogue that we really can help to get a sense of what ails us and begin to formulate a solution as a community to address these issues. Our speakers this evening, first, Senator Jason Lewis. Senator Lewis is the state senator from the 5th Middlesex District and has been since 2014. His district includes a good part of Winchester. Prior to his election to the state senate, Jason was our state representative for 5 years. He is presently the chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health in the Massachusetts State Senate and notably chaired the Special Committee on Marijuana to address the issues of question 4. Speaking on those issues as well will be the Chief of the Winchester Police Department, Peter McDonald. Chief McDonald was appointed the Chief of the Police Department on July 1st of this year. Prior to that, and since 1988, he has been a police officer. In the 8 years prior to his appointment, he was a lieutenant in the police department, and in the last 5 years, the lieutenant in charge of the department. Chief McDonald is a 1978 graduate of this high school. Dr. Bert Rothenbach is the chairman of Rothenbach Research and Consulting, which for 18 years has engaged in the evaluation of various state assessment surveys with a focus on preventative needs assessment projects. He has been the person assessing the results from the Winchester Youth Risk Behavior Survey for us. And finally, Mike Duggan. Mike grew up next door in Arlington. He is the chairman of Wicked Sober, LLC, which runs certified intervention programs. Mike is a certified intervention professional, and through Wicked Sober, they offer a variety of preventative and aftercare programs dealing with mental health and addiction, and Mike has a personal and powerful story to tell on those issues as well. So without further introduction, I'd like to introduce Senator Lewis, who will speak on question 4. Senator Lewis.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter. Good evening, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us for what I hope will be a very informative evening. Thank you to all the sponsors of the evening tonight and all the important work you do in the community. I also want to just recognize and thank both Representative Mike Day, who's here, and also Selectman Mike Betancourt, both of whom are great partners with me in the legislature and in the community, and specifically on issues of mental health, substance abuse, and public health. So thank you. So I'm going to speak to the issue of marijuana policy and specifically ballot question 4. I don't think I would ever have expected that I would be standing before you as the pot senator. It was not my ambition when I ran for the state legislature as the state rep, and now have the privilege to be your state senator. But about 18 months ago, I was asked by the Senate President to chair a special Senate committee on the issue of marijuana policy. Not sure why he asked me, but perhaps because I am the chair of the Public Health Committee, and he recognized that there are obviously very significant public health issues at stake. But I spent about over a year extensively researching the issue of marijuana policy, conducted dozens and dozens of interviews with a wide range of stakeholders, and I also led a delegation out to Colorado, and we spent about 4 days there on the ground observing firsthand the experience of that state with the legalization of marijuana for recreational use and sale. I went into that whole process not knowing all that much, frankly, and with basically an open mind about the idea of legalization, and willing to learn. I did come out of that process, and if we can go back to the first slide for a moment. We did publish a very extensive report. It's 118 pages, and you will learn a lot tonight, but there's a lot more in this report. So for those of you who are interested in digging in even further, I urge you to look it up. Just Google report of the Special Senate Committee. You'll find it, or just call or email my office. But after we published this report in March, based on everything I learned, while I personally am open to the idea of legalization, for me it has to be done with a focus on public health and public safety. That has to take priority over any other issues. And unfortunately, I believe that ballot question 4 does not prioritize public health and public safety. So I've subsequently have been taken a public position in opposition to question 4, and I've been working hard to educate folks about it. Okay, so now if we go to the next slide, it's important to start with understanding the context around marijuana in Massachusetts. It's not true that we have prohibition in Massachusetts. You hear that sometimes thrown around, that prohibition has failed, we need to end prohibition. We don't have prohibition. We decriminalized marijuana in 2008, which means that you can possess up to an ounce of marijuana with not being subject to arrest. At worst, you could get a civil violation, basically like a parking ticket, and that is very rare anyway, because our police officers generally have more important things to do. And by the way, 1 ounce of marijuana is equivalent to about 50 joints, so it's not a particularly small amount. And so essentially what that means is that for those adults who choose to consume marijuana, pretty much they can do that in their own home without being bothered or being subject to arrest. And then second, we did create, back in 2012, at the ballot, a medical marijuana program, and that has had a bumpy road, but it is getting rolled out now more effectively. There are 34,000 people in Massachusetts that have qualified for a medical marijuana card and can access marijuana through dispensaries that are opening up around the state. All right, next slide, please. So just a little bit of context. There are about 13% of the population that it's estimated, do consume marijuana from time to time, and that includes about 1 in 4 high school students. And what is a particular concern, should be, I think, a particular concern to all of us, is the fact that the perception among our youth, the perception that marijuana is a harmful drug, has been declining precipitously since the 1990s. So back then, about 80% of high school seniors, when surveyed, would say that marijuana, they knew that it's a drug that they should stay away from, that it is harmful to brain development and cognitive development. Today, that's now below 40%. So we don't know exactly why, but it does appear that more permissive policies around marijuana, decriminalization, medical marijuana, and now legalization, among other things, has contributed to a view among our teens that marijuana is relatively harmless. Marijuana, I don't know that we're going to really get into the health aspects of it tonight, but suffice it to say that marijuana is not harmless, and it is particularly concerning when your brain is still developing. And we know from current medical research that brain development continues all the way into your early to mid-20s. And when your brain is still developing, the use of marijuana or any potentially addictive substance for that matter is much more dangerous. It can contribute to impaired cognitive development. It increases the risk of developing mental illness. It does impact IQ, academic performance, and career prospects as well. And in addition to that, approximately 1 in 6 teens who start using marijuana will develop a dependence and an addiction to marijuana. So it is also not the case that marijuana is not an addictive drug. It absolutely is the case that people can develop an addiction, and it's a serious addiction. It requires treatment to overcome it. Along with that decline in the perception of harm, we have also seen on the bottom right-hand side an increase in heavy use of marijuana by, again, this is looking at 12th graders. So we don't know for sure if that's what's driving it, but there certainly appears to be a correlation there. All right, if we go to the next slide. It's important to understand that marijuana today is vastly different from what many of you may have in mind when you might remember, the 1960s or 70s or 80s. That marijuana typically had a THC content, which is the potency, of somewhere around 2 to 3%. Today, marijuana is 6 to 10 times more potent than that. The marijuana industry has been breeding plants to increase the amount of THC that's in the plant. Marijuana plants have hundreds, if not thousands, of different compounds in them, but THC is the specific compound that gets you high. So they've been breeding plants to increase the THC, and now what the industry does is they chemically extract THC from the plants, and that forms what's called a hash oil or a concentrate, and then that can be consumed in different ways. It can be vaped like an electronic cigarette. It can be dabbed, which is where you take a substance that almost looks like earwax and you heat it up and inhale it. It's a very, very powerful high. And it can also be infused into foods and beverages, and that's what we mean by marijuana edibles, which I'll get to in a minute. When you extract the THC from the plant, you are approaching potency levels that are actually getting close to 100% pure THC. So it is essentially a different drug than what we were used to in years past. In the Netherlands, where you probably know they've had although marijuana is not legal, they've had a fairly permissive approach to marijuana for a long time. They consider a potency level of 15% to be the line between a soft drug and a hard drug. And as you can see in this slide, in Colorado today, the average marijuana product is already above 15% potency levels. If we go to the next slide. So I don't know if this is new to you, but the kinds of marijuana products that you see on the market today in Colorado and Washington, as this has been commercialized, are heavily weighted to edibles. That's more than 50% of the sales, and a large part of the industry's profits come from edibles. And there's everything you can imagine. When I was in Colorado, everything from cookies, cupcakes, candy bars of all kinds, lollipops, ice cream, salad dressing. I even just recently saw a company that's advertising wine that's infused with THC. A really bad combination, putting alcohol and marijuana together. But this is constantly, this industry is innovating rapidly, very aggressively, trying new products, and looking to increase and expand their customer base. The next slide gives you a sense of some of the marketing. This is, in many ways, I think, following the playbook of big tobacco. You've got products that the industry is actively promoting. They are using social media very aggressively because they know that's where teens and young adults get a lot of their information. They're using celebrities to endorse these products. You've got Snoop Dogg, Wiz Khalifa. Probably nobody knows who Wiz Khalifa is, but let me tell you, teenagers certainly do. Coupons, discounts, billboards. This stuff could well be up on TV and radio advertising as well over time. And a big part of the industry's strategy is to normalize the opinions and culture around marijuana. To make it appear, and be treated more like alcohol, and be sort of broadly accepted that way. The next slide, please. So another part of the strategy in Colorado and Washington is similar to tobacco and the alcohol industry for that matter, is to expand access. The more you expand access and availability, obviously you make it easier for people to consume. There are more pot shops. Marijuana in Colorado and Washington is typically sold in dedicated pot shops. There are more of them than Starbucks and McDonald's combined today. And that's despite the fact that a large part of Colorado did not opt into their recreational marijuana law. So in Colorado, a city or a town or a county essentially has to opt in to allowing commercial businesses. And even despite the fact that many have not opted in, you still have such a proliferation of pot shops in the areas which do allow them. The next slide. This is a picture of Denver, Colorado, and it shows that these are all different either pot shops or cultivation facilities like grow houses or manufacturing businesses that that manufacture all these different products. And Denver recently had to stop issuing new licenses because there was such a saturation, and they were starting to having concerns from residents. And anybody have a guess, the concentration of where you see those dots? Anyone want to guess what kinds of neighborhoods those are in Denver? Yeah. Actually, the opposite. These tend to be lower income neighborhoods, communities of color, more vulnerable neighborhoods within Denver. And so it's sort of the same sort of pattern that we see with the alcohol industry as well, tending to target more vulnerable communities. And we've actually seen, as a result of that, and as a result of the arrest patterns in Colorado post-legalization, that if anything, racial disparities have actually increased, not decreased, which is often one of the arguments made for legalization, is to reduce racial disparities in arrests. But we have not seen that happen in Colorado. Let's go to the next slide. Obviously, one of the main issues that's discussed around this is the impact on teen use. And although there's some conflicting data out of Colorado, it is undeniable that Colorado today has the highest rate of teen marijuana use of any state in the country. And of the top 20 states that, in terms of teen marijuana use, all of those states essentially are states that have decriminalized and or have medical marijuana programs. And again, on the right-hand side is the same chart we saw before, where the perception of harm has been falling, and heavy use among high school seniors has increased. It's also, I don't know if I have a slide on this coming up, but it's also important to note that Colorado has one of the highest rates, not just for marijuana use, but also alcohol, opioids, and cocaine. So it does not appear to be the case that marijuana, having higher marijuana use, is substituting for other addictive substances. And there is other research that also has shown that these substances are often complements for each other and used together. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this would result in lower opioid use or alcohol use. All right, next slide. Chief McDonald's going to talk more about this particular public safety issue, but I'll just say that we have seen about a doubling of fatalities caused by or linked to drivers who were high on marijuana in Washington state, and that's according to a AAA report. And I think the real big concern here is we don't have anything equivalent to a breathalyzer test to detect THC in drivers like we do to detect alcohol. And we also don't have a legal standard. So it's a well-accepted standard that if you have more than 0.08 alcohol, in your blood, that you are impaired, and that is a standard that will hold up in a court of law. We don't have any similar standard for how much THC in your blood constitutes impairment. So therefore, it makes it very difficult for our police officers to actually arrest someone for driving impaired, and it makes it very difficult to build a case in court and actually hold people accountable today. So we have a particular concern about what that would mean if more people are using marijuana and driving. The next slide. So this is specific now to this ballot question, and here's what I would say. If you're somebody who who opposes legalization of marijuana for recreational use under, any circumstances, then obviously your decision on November 8th is an easy one. You would likely vote against the ballot question. If you are someone who is open to the legalization of marijuana, then I think what you need to do is look very carefully at what this specific ballot question proposes to do. It's 24 pages long. If you received the red book, which is the voter guide for the ballot questions, you may have noticed that probably about 3/4 of that book is taken up by the marijuana question. And the authors of that question, which is the Marijuana Policy Project, a national group that is largely backed by the commercial marijuana industry, took a very specific approach to how to write a legalization law. And myself and many others are very concerned that that approach favors the interests of the industry and their profits and doesn't adequately protect public health and public safety. So these are some of the specific concerns. We talked about potency before, and there's no limits on potency. Marijuana edibles are specifically authorized by this ballot question, and there's no specific limits or restrictions written into the ballot question. Any of these products could potentially be sold and promoted and marketed in Massachusetts. Remember I talked about the fact that in Colorado, a city or a town has to opt in to allowing commercial marijuana businesses in that community. This ballot question is written the opposite way. So automatically a community is opted in, and the only way you could entirely opt out is through a local ballot referendum. So the town of Winchester did not want to have pot shops or marijuana grow facilities. It could not be a vote of the Board of Selectmen to not allow that. It could not be done by the Board of Health. It could not be done by town meeting, which are all the ways we generally make policy in the town. It would have to be a local ballot referendum of all the voters, and a majority would have to vote. So it's a very high bar to be able to not allow that to happen in the community. And it's written that way on purpose because I believe the marijuana industry saw what happened in Colorado, and that a lot of communities opted out, didn't opt in. So they have therefore written it in the opposite way. By the way, the medical marijuana law is an opt-in law. In other words, Winchester would have to say, yes, we will accept a medical marijuana dispensary. The Board of Selectmen would have to make that decision before it could locate here. The state's casino law that was passed several years ago also is an opt-in law. In other words, a community has to vote and decide they want to host a casino before one could locate there. This ballot question is written the opposite way. The ballot question allows people to grow marijuana in their home. Washington state does not allow any home growing. Colorado allows a limited amount. This ballot question is very permissive on home growing, up to 12 plants. That may not sound like a lot, but that's essentially a mini pot farm. 12 plants can generate somewhere around 10 to 12 pounds of marijuana. A plant will grow to full maturity in about 6 months. They're very large. And that amount of marijuana marijuana is worth a lot of money. So people who say, well, we allow home brewing, what's the difference? The difference is if you brew your own beer, I don't think anybody's going to buy it. I doubt you're going to make any money selling it. Very different when we're talking about marijuana, which is such a valuable cash crop. So in Colorado, law enforcement has found that, if anything, they're spending more time trying to enforce the law. They're trying, because there's homes that people are using as grow houses and essentially hiding within the legal structure to grow marijuana, to sell it into the illegal market. And also they have a big problem with smuggling across state lines. So a lot of the marijuana business has relocated to Colorado from other places, even from Mexico, and then they grow it there, they manufacture it, and then they smuggle it out of Colorado. Our police officers with us tonight probably can tell you that they've seen some of that product here in Massachusetts. So we're very concerned that if this ballot question passes, then Massachusetts would become the smuggling hub for New England, because then within the legal market, people would be able to hide within that, and have grow houses and other operations that could then supply New York State, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and so on. This ballot question also gives preferential licensing to medical marijuana dispensaries. So this isn't the case in Winchester, since we don't have one. But in communities that have agreed to host a medical marijuana dispensary, that could then go into the recreational market. So even though the expectation of the community was that only patients would be served there, that same facility could convert and become a recreational marijuana outlet without the requiring the approval of that community. And then the tax rate is another issue which I'm going to come back to in a minute. And so let's move on. We talked about this issue, which is one of the arguments that's often made in favor of the ballot question, is it's a way to reduce disparities in arrests. And while I think that racial disparities in our criminal justice system are a huge issue, and I'm a strong supporter of criminal justice reforms, like changing our mandatory minimum laws and our bail laws and various other things, I don't believe that this ballot question is a solution to that problem. I think that's actually misguided. And unfortunately, what we've seen, both in terms of arrest patterns in Colorado post-legalization, as well as where this industry tends to locate, the slide I showed you earlier in the city of Denver, I think is actually increases health and racial disparities. Next slide. So this is the tax issue. Some people argue, well, if we regulate it and tax it, we'll generate, millions and millions of dollars that can solve all of our budget woes. Unfortunately, this ballot question has a very low tax rate written into it. It's about a third to a quarter of what the total tax rate is in Colorado and the state of Washington. So when you see numbers thrown around in terms of the revenue that those states are bringing in, those would not be at all the kinds of revenues that we would see in Massachusetts. Furthermore, we don't tax medical marijuana in this state, and they do in those states. So those numbers include medical marijuana taxes too. So the concern is that not only would we bring in far, far less in revenues from taxing this, but we would now incur a whole slew of new costs to regulate this industry. You have to stand up a new regulatory structure. You have extensive public health costs to educate adults and in terms of responsible use. You have extensive public safety costs in terms of law enforcement training, developing a breathalyzer equivalent. You have agricultural costs, because we would have to regulate the growing and what pesticides are safe to use. The federal government, because this is illegal under federal law, we would not be able to rely upon any federal agencies. In other words, no FDA for food safety, no EPA for pesticides, no USDA. So all of the places we normally rely on federal regulation to ensure safety, we would not be able to rely on that, and those responsibilities would fall on state government and local government, which of course we would incur additional taxpayer-funded costs to do that. I think we're on almost the last slide. Another argument that's made in favor of the ballot question is, well, this is out there and it's not going away, and this would help dry up the black market. Maybe if ultimately marijuana is legal under federal law, and then you would start to dry up the black market nationwide. But while it's still illegal under federal law, which doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon, if we were to legalize it in Massachusetts and other states are still illegal, that's when you have this huge problem that I talked about in Colorado, where criminals use the legal market as essentially a cover for illegal operations, and then as a smuggling base to other states. So that, unfortunately, and because of the home growing, the very permissive home growing that's allowed, we also are very concerned that the illegal market is not likely to dry up, and in fact would continue to thrive even if we were to pass the ballot question and legalize recreational use. Any more slides? I think that is the last one. So the Chief's going to speak some more on many of these issues, and then I think we're going to take some questions on the specifics of this issue and the ballot question before we move on to our other speakers. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jason. We'll now hear from Chief McDonald.
Hi. First, thank you for coming tonight, and I'd like to thank the Coalition for a Safer Community for inviting me to be here tonight. This is an important topic. The Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association strongly opposes the legalization of marijuana in Massachusetts. As veteran police officers, we believe that allowing the delivery, sale, transfer, growing, cultivating, processing, and manufacturing of marijuana and its derivatives would have a detrimental impact on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a variety of reasons, including, and these things are what they have been experiencing in Colorado since 2012. Impaired driving, increases in motor vehicle accidents and motor vehicle fatalities, increased in youth marijuana use, increase in marijuana-related hospital admissions, marijuana-related exposures to children, some children very young, increase in THC extraction from labs, which pose the threat of explosion and fires in communities where these labs might generate. And finally, unregulated edibles with high THC levels. Given that Massachusetts is currently bogged down in an addiction epidemic of historic proportions, I don't believe that now is the time to increase access to marijuana, marijuana byproducts, and high-concentrate THC products, which would be permitted if this November ballot question passes. While many voters may be under the impression that the ballot question would permit sale of marijuana in plant form, it would also allow for the commercial sale of potent extracts, including hash oil, resins, and various forms of concentrates that would include marijuana candy and beverages containing very high levels of THC. Should this pass, we believe that Massachusetts would quickly suffer the same undesirable impacts that are currently taking place in Washington and Colorado, where recently enacted laws now allow, as you know, commercial marijuana sales. Those states have seen enormous surges in impaired driving, drug driving fatalities, and diversion of bulk marijuana to other states, as well as people flocking to the states of Washington and Colorado to buy these products. Since 2012, Colorado has seen drug-related suspensions and expulsions of students in their public schools go up 32%. Hospitalization related to marijuana use has increased 82% from 2008 to 2013. Denver emergency rooms are seeing an increased number of children, many of them very young, who have accidentally ingested edibles such as brownies and candies. Police interdiction of marijuana destined for other states has increased 397% from 2008 to 2013. Marijuana-related traffic fatalities in Colorado have doubled. Colorado's largest provider of detox has seen double the number of clients between 2013 and 2014. While traffic fatalities involving drivers under the influence of marijuana and THC have increased in Colorado and Washington, currently there is no standardized field sobriety test, either in Colorado, Washington, or here in Massachusetts, that we can use to determine if somebody is operating a vehicle under the influence of marijuana. The proponents of marijuana legalization would have voters believe that the drug laws that we've had in this country, and particularly in Massachusetts, resulted in the arrest of people for possessing marijuana, but that isn't true. Since 1975, the possession of marijuana in Massachusetts have been automatically dismissed in Massachusetts courts. And as Jason Lewis indicated, currently possession of under an ounce of marijuana in Massachusetts is a civil offense and it's a non-criminal infraction. People who are behind this legislation also would like you to believe that marijuana sales would cut into the profits of organized crime, but that's not what's happened elsewhere, and certainly not in Colorado and in Washington. We've seen drug dealers come in from other states to take advantage of the fact that people there can now buy pot legally. And given the choice between buying in a store where it is regulated and heavily taxed and getting it on the street where no tax is paid, customers are attracted to the street. And Colorado, as Senator Lewis said, is not making the money that they expected to make in tax revenues. We're encouraged here in Massachusetts with this upcoming referendum by the outcome of a ballot initiative in Ohio, where voters rejected this legalization in spite of a $25 million campaign for the pro-marijuana movement. Massachusetts should brace themselves as we get closer to November for an onslaught of television commercials and other advertisements advocating for the legalization and recreational use of marijuana. I'm proud to stand up here today and speak about this issue because I think it's terribly important for all of us to understand what the issues are and how, if this marijuana initiative passes in November, how it could be so detrimental for our families and for our children. Thank you. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you very much, Chief. We'll now have a question period directed to the issues surrounding question 4 and the legalization of marijuana. You can direct your questions to Senator Lewis or Chief McDonnell, and we have microphones throughout. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is wonderful, number one, that we're all getting together. Number two, I think it's coming whether we want it or not. And I think we really just need to prepare. We're not Colorado. We're not these other places. We can learn from that. But what I'm hearing tonight is, is making my heart pound. It's scary. But what do we do? And I have a lot of questions based on some of the information you gave out. I am not pro, I don't want it legalized, but I don't think that my way is going to happen. But the information out there, such as edibles, in this state, they would be regulated. Right now they aren't. Kids make gummy bears, brownies, whatever it be. They don't know what they're getting. The state will regulate every edible, and I have no stake in this, mind you. This is just information from someone who is a patient for years and saw how they took that and really legitimized it and scan everything, and it is so controlled. They will not allow advertising to children in the state of Massachusetts. Candy bars are not going to look like that. That's a big difference, because Department of Public Health is in charge of the way we market it and such. So I'll just put it there. But there are a lot of, the statistics about, and I would just love to know, because there's so many other statistics that say, yeah, opiate use is down and driving is down, or this idea that you don't have a breathalyzer. True, but anyone who seems impaired is impaired.
That doesn't hold up in a court of law, though, so it does not effective. But in terms of a regulation,
if somebody is impaired at the wheel?
Let me be clear, this will not be regulated by the Department of Public Health. So that's a critical distinction. Okay. Medical marijuana in Massachusetts is under the direction of the State Department of Public Health. The approach they take to it is a health-first perspective. And it's true, for the medical marijuana program, they have put in place very tough regulations, although I think there's still things they could do better. The difference there is it's a public health agency that has the regulatory authority, and it's also a non-profit. Medical marijuana dispensaries are non-profits. They don't have a profit motive. They're not looking to advertise or do the kind of commercial things that we're talking about with a billion-dollar commercial marijuana industry. This particular ballot question would set up a new structure, a so-called Cannabis Control Commission to regulate the industry, would not necessarily have any public health expertise or public safety expertise on that commission. It would be 3 people appointed by the state treasurer. They would be advised by a cannabis advisory board, so-called, 9 out of 15 of which members would have to come from the industry. They would have to have industry experience. I call that the fox guarding the hen house. I can tell you I don't have a lot of confidence that once this industry is in the state, and they're already a $5 billion industry just between Colorado, Washington, and California, that they're not going to push back very hard, even if regulators try to do the right thing and try to curb the kinds of products that can be sold, the packaging of those products, the advertising. It's extraordinarily difficult. We've been fighting the tobacco industry. Ask Jen Murphy in the front row here from our Department of Public Health in Winchester. We've been battling the tobacco industry for decades, and it's extremely difficult to restrict commercial free speech, for example, what we can do in terms of their products that they sell. For example, we fought for years to try to stop the sale of flavored cigarettes, and finally the FDA took action and they don't allow that. The industry has responded now by selling fruit-flavored and candy-flavored cigars, which are very popular among teenagers and a growing problem. They've also come out with electronic cigarettes, which are also largely unregulated. So once this industry has a foothold, unless you have very strong public health and public safety safeguards in place, I believe from day one, and the regulators to regulate it who come at it with public health and public safety first, not the interests of the industry first, I'm very concerned that we've seen this playbook before with tobacco. We know where it leads, and that's not a place I think we want to go in Massachusetts.
Further questions on question 4? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So I had a question about the statistics that you're using. I noticed a lot of them were coming from Colorado. Would you say that those are kind of corroborated with the Washington statistics? I know it's kind of hard because we don't have a lot of examples, but I'm just trying to figure out if it's kind of like a one-off with that state or if it's been seen over and over again.
We don't have a lot of data yet because there's only 4 states out of all 50 that have actually legalized marijuana for recreational use. So it's not like Massachusetts is, behind the times at all. I mean, if anything, we're ahead of most states because we've already decriminalized and have medical marijuana. So in many ways, we're in the forefront here. The data that both the chief and I presented are essentially from Colorado and Washington, because those are the only 2 states where they've really started retail commercial sales. Oregon and Alaska are just now getting to that. So they've made it legal to possess it. I think they may allow some home growing in those states, but they haven't really had active retail sales yet. I have to tell you, the data is very tricky. There are different studies. Part of the problem is not having good baseline data, so not knowing where you start from. That's my concern. a big concern. I'm a data person, and I would really like to make sure we have good data in Massachusetts so that we can track changes in teen use, changes in potency, changes in drug driving rates, so we can make good policy. We don't have good baseline data. It's one of the other challenges we didn't even get to in my presentation. And this ballot question does nothing for data collection or research as well. There's no mention of that. And the other point I would make is that I also think that the real consequences that we would see wouldn't really be within a month or a year or even 2 years, even though, as you saw from what the chief and I presented, there's already some data that is very concerning about, drug driving, for example, and some hospitalizations of young children. But I really think the real concern is what happens over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, as the commercialization takes hold, as the industry expands and grows and advertises and, pushes new kinds of enticing products. So that we won't see, until sometime in the future.
Dan, there was a question here in the center aisle. This one.
I know that when they first decriminalized marijuana, and Senator, you had said that there would be a $100 fine. The other impact of that was that there was supposed to be a class that either a student or an adult had to take. And what happened with that was that there weren't really any classes, certainly in the Winchester community and around, that would be sort of geared towards that. So although it had a good intention of maybe getting some cases off the docket in the criminal courts, it really didn't do what the legislature, I think, wanted to. And when we call the marijuana, industry an industry, we as parents, I think, are all here for our kids. That's not the industry our kids are looking at. So I know if we're talking about somebody growing marijuana in their house, what's being mixed in with it? Is it fentanyl? Is it other opiates? You don't know. So that might be an industry that, excuse me? Right, and that's where our kids are getting they're not going to be going to the medical dispensaries. So unless they can really regulate that, this is not the time for this to be voted for at all. And as far as operating under the influence of drugs, it's been on the books forever. It's the easiest case to defend in the world, whether it's marijuana or any other kind of drug at all. There's no way to really prosecute them. So this is the wrong time, very much so.
Thank you. Further questions on question 4? Yes, sir.
I have 3 concerns. One is that marijuana has been illegal forever, and that the law hasn't been enforced. Kids get it, and there's nothing that the law seems to be able to do about it. There's no will amongst the people to enforce it, so that our kids are getting drugs. Keeping it illegal isn't stopping them. What it's doing is it's giving them to the drug dealers, who carry guns, knives, and probably give them free samples of cocaine or heroin or whatever else they want to give them free samples of. And it's hooking the kids into a very wrong channel of acquisition to get their marijuana. Not just children, but adults as well. It's making them not respect the law. It's making the law look like a joke. And this has been going on forever. And now some people come forward with question 4 to legalize it and to change that situation. And I think that's good. I think that's positive. We need a change. We need to do something about it. We failed to do anything about it ever since it's been. It's a failure. It's been very corrupting and corrosive to our society, internationally, nationally, in the state, and in this town, I would suspect. There's dark money out there. There's loads of it. Money's going around to keep this stuff illegal, and I don't want to play into it. What lobbies are out there trying to say, all right, marijuana should be kept illegal? The ones that can profit from it. Perhaps the drug dealers and the cartels are paying the highest offices in America to keep it illegal. Maybe the highest offices in America are paying our state politicians to keep it illegal. I think it's corrosive. We don't know who to trust. We don't know what arguments to listen to. This is the situation we're in. In question 4, we'll do something about that. It makes it legal, it takes away the dark money, and it puts everything forward. And then we'll have a law, this is my third point, that can be changed, that should be dealt with, that should be looked at seriously. That this law perhaps is very bad, but why haven't the politicians done anything to make it a good law? Brag about and say, this is good, this is a regulation that will work, this will keep the drugs from our kids. It will make drugs safer so that it isn't laced with fentanyl. I think that we should vote in favor of it and then deal with the consequences of it as quickly as possible and take it seriously. So, Senator Lewis, you can perhaps start talking about how we can make the law work and not why we should defeat it and keep the status quo with drug dealers coming to Winchester, selling drugs to the citizens of town, and the police unable to do anything about it. Not that the police in Winchester are less capable than any other police, because the police universally in every country have been unable to keep this stuff away from people, to deal with the drug cartels. It's a real political force. The bodies are piling up in Mexico. The bodies are piling up in America. It's causing all sorts of social problems. And all we can do is say, well, let's defeat this possible solution to the problem here in Massachusetts. I don't think that's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the speaker addressing the difficulties with the current market in marijuana and the challenges there. I just note on behalf of the chair that the suggestion that the Massachusetts Police Chiefs Association somehow comes under the influence of the marijuana cartels and those profiting from the illegal use of drugs seems not merited in this instance. So I'd let Senator Lewis speak to the issues of that part, and then perhaps the chief briefly to the concerns the chief has.
I apologize because I have to unfortunately leave, but
Just let Senator Lewis respond.
The only thing I
Thanks.
wanted to say is I don't disagree with actually much of what you said. What I think personally we should do is vote no on this and vote it down, because I do think, as I tried to share, I think it's very, very badly written, and it is not the best way to move forward, and is not better than the status quo. However, I don't argue that the status quo doesn't have problems. I think it does. So what I think we should do is go back to the drawing board and work together with all the stakeholders at the table, so that law enforcement is at the table, addiction experts, mayors and municipal officials and selectmen, the members of the industry, they are all at the table, and write a law that would protect public health and safety, but would not create all of the problems that this would create. I personally, as a legislator, am committed to working on that. That would obviously be a challenge to get everybody on the same page, but that's what it takes to get laws passed. It takes hard work, and everyone has to engage, all the stakeholders. It shouldn't just be that one group of people, in this case, essentially the industry, gets to write the law that they want.
Thank you very much, Senator. I think we're now going to, excuse Senator Lewis, who has another engagement this evening. Thank him for taking the time to address us on that issue. And Dr. Bert Rothenbach will address us on his assessment and review of the Winchester Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Dr. Rothenbach.
Hi, it's good to be here tonight. We're going to broaden the subject out a bit. The youth. Give us your credentials first, please. Sure. Bert Rothenbach. I have a PhD in sociology. I've been doing work with school-based prevention needs assessment surveys for almost 20 years now. I don't know, I've done maybe 2 or 3 dozen school districts in Massachusetts, statewide surveys in Florida, Pennsylvania, Arizona, New Jersey. I specifically work with school-based prevention needs assessment surveys like the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Did that cover it? Great. Next slide, please. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it's an established survey. It's coordinated by the Centers for Disease Control, and they do a national survey, statewide surveys, and a lot of school districts like Winchester do a custom version of the survey to gather health behavior data for middle school and high school students. So here in Winchester, we have a customized YRBS. It was administered about 11 months ago. So, and there's a separate middle school and a separate high school questionnaire. They're pretty long surveys, 81 questions on the middle school survey, 120 questions on the high school survey. Many of the questions are same so that you can combine the data from the middle school and the high school, but some of them are different. And we, just to give you an idea of the sample sizes for the surveys, we had 878 valid records from the middle school and 1,134 from the high school. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to show you data on a lot of the substance use rates for a number of substances at the middle school and high school level, and I'm going to present it primarily in two different ways. Lifetime prevalence rate, ATOD, by the way, stands for alcohol, tobacco, or other drug. A lifetime prevalence rate is the percentage of respondents who say they've used that drug one or more times in their life. So it's a good measure of experimentation or trying something. The other way that we're going to look at the data will be past 30-day use, which is one or more uses in the past 30 days, and that's a good measure of the current usage rate. So these bars show the rates for all the lifetime prevalence drugs on the middle school survey, so just middle school students. So alcohol is most commonly reported. 7.2%, just fewer than 1 out of 10 middle school students in Winchester said they've tried alcohol. Vapor products, that's new. We just added it to the survey in 2015. And not only here in Winchester, not only across the state, but across the country, we're seeing vapor product, e-cigarette use getting up there, right up there with alcohol, usually passing cigarettes, and in some cases passing marijuana. So about 1 in 20 middle schoolers have tried vapor products. Inhalants, 2.9%. Cigarettes, just 1.7%. That's way down from a number of years ago. And marijuana, which we've been talking about, 1%. So just 1% of the students, the middle school students, have tried marijuana, and we've got a few other drugs there. The rates are very low. Now, I'm going to show you the high school rates here on the next slide, please. And you'll see there's a big difference between high school and middle school, okay? You can look at this in two different ways. You can say, wow, it's really bad news that the high school rate's so much higher. Okay, that's true, but it's very significant that the middle school rates are much lower. Early initiation of substance use is a big risk factor for all kinds of negative outcomes, negative health impacts of substance use. So the fact that the middle school rates are so much lower than the high school rates, that's a very good thing. Okay, so high school data, Winchester high school data, experimentation rates. More than half of the high school students have reported trying alcohol on one or more occasions, 55.5%. Vapor products are at 29.7%, and then marijuana is right below that at 29.3%. That's a pretty typical pattern. And cigarettes drops down to 16.3%. The other drugs range from 10% for illicit use of prescription drugs down to 2.3% for injecting a drug with a needle. Now again, these are experimentation rates, trying one or more occasions in your lifetime. Next slide, please. Okay, so This is the second prevalence rate I told you about, past 30-day use. So this is a measure of current use. And for the middle school students here in the state, it goes from 2.2% for alcohol down to just 0.3% for cigars. All right, so these are very low rates of current use. The orange bar is for binge drinking, and that's the measure of high-intensity drinking in the survey. It's 5 or more drinks in a row on 1 or more occasions in the past 2 weeks. So just less than 1% report that kind of binge drinking in middle school. Next slide, please. Okay. Current use, 30-day use among high school students. More than 1 out of 3 high school students report having used alcohol in the past 30 days. About 1 in 5 report binge drinking in the last 30 days. And almost just slightly less than that, 19.2% report marijuana use. And then we have vapor products at 17.6%. And it ranges from 8.8% for cigars down to 4% for inhalants. Okay, let's look at some trend data. And this is data for the district from previous administrations of the YRBS. And the orange line is for lifetime use in the high school, the purple line, 30-day use in the high school, and the green line, lifetime use in middle school for 30-day alcohol use. So the good news, right, is that especially since 2011, alcohol use in high school, lifetime and 30-day, has come down. It's quite a big drop since 2013. From 2013 to 2015, 30-day alcohol use has gone from 39.8% to 36.4%. Lifetime use among middle school respondents from 9.6 to 7.2%. Those are pretty substantial reductions in use over a 2-year period. Next slide, please. All right, we didn't have as many data points for binge drinking, so I'm showing you this using bars. And here we also see some pretty significant reductions among high school students from 29.8% in 2011 to 20.6% in 2015, and from middle school from just under 5% in 2011 to less than 1% in 2015. So alcohol use in the school district is going down. Next slide. Let's look at the tobacco use trends. Here we've got smoking in the past 30 days, high school, that's the blue line. Smokeless tobacco, past 30 days, the orange line, and lifetime smoking in middle school, that's the red line. And these are very dramatic reductions, and they're similar to reductions that other districts have reported across the state and students all across the country as well. Tobacco use among youth is way down, and it appears to be that reductions appear to be continuing, so that's very positive news. Okay, well, we talked a lot about marijuana use, and here we have the lifetime and 30-day prevalence trends, and this is just in the Winchester School District, lifetime high school, 30-day high school, and lifetime middle school. And this pattern is very similar to the national pattern, where we saw a rise at the end of last decade, sort of a leveling out, and then some reduction over the last few years. Now, what we talked about happening in Colorado, Washington State, those places, those are small states in terms of the overall U.S. population. That could be the start of a whole nother trend heading in another direction. But in terms of national data, this is the pattern we have been seeing. And in terms of the local data here in the school district, these are pretty impressive reductions in the last 2 years. So that's good news. Okay, so I showed you some rates of marijuana use, 30-day marijuana use for middle school students and high school students. But I think it's useful to look at how these rates change across all the grade levels, because the changes are pretty dramatic. So the first set of bars The blue bars, this is lifetime use, and you can see you go from less than 1% of 6th graders having tried marijuana to about half of 12th graders. And the increase really starts in 9th grade and then just, continues on all the way through 12th grade. So it's very, very strongly correlated with age. And for 30-day use, from 7% in 9th grade to 32.6% in 12th grade. So even though the rates of use are down from 2 years ago, we still have about 1 in 3 12th graders reporting marijuana use in the past 30 days. Okay. For the first time in 2015, we had a question at the end of the survey. It was an open-ended question. Students could write in a response, and we asked them if there were any substances, any drugs on the survey that, not that they were using, but that students in the school district were using. And the top 3 responses were LSD or acid. 1.5% said they thought that that students in the district were using that. Adderall, 1.2%, and mushrooms at 1%. So the rates of these for these write-ins were low compared to the substances that were asked about directly on the survey. All right, I'm going to show you a few slides now that provide some comparisons between Winchester, between Massachusetts, and the national YRBS. So the blue line is Winchester, the red line is Massachusetts, and the green bars are the national data. So for alcohol use, 30-day alcohol use, and then binge drinking, you can see that Winchester is a little bit above the state and national numbers. Not a lot, but a little bit. For cigarettes, the district is a little bit below the state, and both the district and the state are way below the national average. For vapor products, Winchester is lower than the state and the national numbers. And for marijuana, the district is below the state by quite a bit and a little bit below the national numbers. So it's interesting how in some substance categories it can be higher, in others it can be lower. Okay, so we have questions about riding in the car with a drinking driver on the high school survey, and about driving under the influence. So I'm showing you the percentages by grade level, 9th through 12th grade. And so if you take the purple bars, if you look at the 10th graders, 20.6% of 12th graders say that in the past 30 days they've been in the car with a driver who'd been drinking. For the green lines, let's look at the 12th graders. 6.1% of drivers say that they've driven under the influence of alcohol in the past 30 days. Just want to say one thing. We've talked a lot about marijuana use. I've seen these driving questions that ask about alcohol and marijuana, and the rates for both riding with an impaired driver and driving under the influence are usually higher for marijuana than they are for alcohol. Back one slide, please. All right, so let's look at the trend. We've got the riding with a drinking driver in high school, driving while drinking, high school, and riding with a drinking driver in middle school. And even though all these rates are higher than we want to see, right, this is dangerous behavior, this is something to be concerned about. The good news is that we're seeing some fairly significant reductions since 2013. So that's very good. Next slide. Okay. Everybody's talking about texting while driving, right? It's a big issue. Everybody who has kids is concerned about safety and how texting and other forms of distracted driving impact youth driver safety. And so here we have a question on the survey that asks about texting while driving. So these are the rates among drivers, okay? 36.7% of students who drive say they've texted while driving in their lifetimes. And in many of our measures, the difference between the female and the male respondents isn't very pronounced. They're usually pretty close. In some cases, female respondents actually report slightly higher rates of some of these behaviors. But for texting while driving, the boys in the school are doing it more than the girls are, by 10 percentage points. So the rates for texting while driving, I know they're a lot higher than any of us want to see. Again, we have some positive news. It's gone down quite a bit since 2013, more than 10 percentage point reduction since 2013. So that's good. Let's compare Winchester to the state and to the national results for riding with a drinking driver, driving while drinking, and texting while driving. And you can see Winchester's doing a little bit better than the state and the national average on every measure except driving under the influence, where the national average is a little bit lower. But for texting while driving, quite a bit lower than the national average. For riding with a drinking driver, a little bit below, just about the same as the state and about 2 percentage points lower than the national average. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to move away from the substance use. I'm going to show you, the survey covers a lot of different student health behavior topics. We can't cover them all in this presentation, but I'm going to present a little bit of the data to you in a couple other subject areas. There are questions about sexual behavior and sexual health on the survey. We ask about whether students are sexually active, whether they've had sexual intercourse. And you can see the percentage goes from 2.5% in 6th grade to 41.9% in 12th grade. Next slide. Here's some of the data on the consequences of sexual behavior. The first 4 bars, the orange bars, let's look at those. Among students who are sexually active, 25.6% say that they were drinking or using drugs the last time they had sex. 66.2% say they used a condom the last time they had sexual intercourse, and 80.2% said they used a birth control method the last time. 3.9% report having been pregnant or gotten someone pregnant. The purple bars are about sexual violence and harassment. 7.6% report that they had some type of unwanted sexual contact. 4.2% report they were forced to have sex. Among those who are dating, 3.5% say that they have been physically hurt by someone they were dating. And again, among those who are dating, 8.7% said they were forced to do sexual things by their date. So there's some areas of concern here as well. All right, we have some questions. The YRBS always has questions about symptoms of depression and about suicidal thinking. So these are past year prevalence rates. So it's the percentage of students who reported this behavior or this thinking on one or more occasions in the past 12 months. So 14.9% say they've hurt themselves on purpose. 17.3% say they felt sad or hopeless. 11.4% say they've considered suicide. 7.3% made a plan. 6.2% attempted suicide. And 2.3% say they reported an injury from a suicide attempt. Comparing Winchester, comparing some of these rates to the state and national data. Well, the rates we just saw, they're a bit shocking. The one piece of good news is that Winchester is lower than the state and the national data. I mean, let's just look at one of these numbers. Let's look at considered suicide. For the high school students in the district, it was 11.4% compared to 19.4% with the national YRBS. All right, so there's a lot more information in the survey, a lot of other questions, and I put the websites up on the slide here. You can go to these websites and you can explore the data yourself. You can get frequency distributions, you can get prevalence rates for all the different subject areas in the middle school and the high school survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to introduce to you Mike Duggan from Wicked Sober LLC, who's going to speak to us about the programs that he has and some of his own experience. Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the other panelists tonight. I think what this night really did a great job of is just getting useful information out to the public for them to make their determination or their decision as far as how they want to proceed on this ballot question. My job is just to give you a little bit more of my experience, my own personal experience, and just what we see in the addiction treatment field. So my name is Mike Duggan. I'm originally an Arlington resident. I just recently bought a home in Winchester, and my children now, I have a 5- and 3-year-old, are going, the oldest to Vincent Owen, and the youngest is still in pre-K. So I'm just finding out what I'm in store for as a parent. So, you know, good luck to me, right? But in terms of the addiction treatment field, I'm the founder of Wicked Sober, the CEO, and I'm also the co-founder of Healing Hills Village, which is a 90-bed inpatient facility in central Massachusetts that we just recently merged with Recovery Centers of America, which is a national provider that's opening up a 207-bed hospital in Danvers, Mass. So collectively, we're bringing 300 beds online this year in the state of Massachusetts in the addiction treatment field. I'm also certified interventionist, but I'm also a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I haven't had a drink or drug since April 14th of 2009. And thank you. And certainly, my road began to get pretty bad with the introduction of prescription pain medication, which was after I broke my wrist senior year playing hockey at Arlington High School, and the solution to the pain was a prescription, and it opened up you know, certainly Pandora's box for me in my life, but I do make it a point to mention that the experimentation of drugs and alcohol started with marijuana when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade, and also same with alcohol. So for myself and my experience, there certainly was, you know, a contributing factor there. And it's not to say that every person who smokes marijuana ends up on heroin, but in my experience, last year, Wicked Sober fielded about 6,800 phone calls, and most of those were primarily opiate dependent, and majority of those all started with marijuana, alcohol, and the adolescent ages as well. So there's certainly, we're seeing a increase in phone calls in the younger ages moving into high school. We have a lot of high school kids now call us that are on heroin. I know the senator had made a comment about the fox guarding the hen house at one point as well. And just when I was at Arlington High School, there was an influx of OxyContin. And we see, you know, heroin was always an illegal drug, but what we ultimately did was we legalized heroin in a pill. The pharmaceutical companies, especially Purdue Pharma, were the ones who were brought in to train the hospitals and facilities on how to treat pain by the Joint Commission, or JACO at that time. And that, in my opinion, is like bringing the tobacco companies to come in and train the specialists on how to treat asthma by prescribing them cigarette smoke. With what we're doing right now in the state of Massachusetts, it's been a big concern of mine because the work that we're doing on prevention and education, by talking to a lot of middle schools and high schools about the dangers of prescription drug misuse and abuse, I feel like we're losing a lot of traction because the overall, it seems like the overall census with a lot of the students that we're engaging is that marijuana is no big deal. And I know with nicotine, with the efforts that were put into prevention and education, overall, a lot of the parents agreed with that messaging that it was harmful, and they were supportive of the efforts that were put in, but it seems like a lot of the parents that we've engaged as well are not as concerned with marijuana being a big deal. And that's unfortunate because right now Right now, we're finding ourselves in an opiate crisis. Last year, I believe we had a little over 1,500 people that passed away from accidental overdoses in the state of Massachusetts. A lot of those were heroin, but a lot of those were also with prescription pain medication. 4 out of 5 heroin users started with prescription pain medication, and I think that's very important to know. But what's also very important to know is the United States accounts for 4.5% of the world's population, but we also consume 80% of the prescription opioid supply in the world, and we're certainly not experiencing 80% of the world's pain. The reality of the situation is society as a whole, we have become accustomed to prescribe our way out of problems that ultimately we're experiencing, and there is a lack of education on the subject of addiction, and that's very concerning, especially as we approach this ballot question, because the reality of the situation is, are we equipped to handle these types of questions dealing with addiction with our young populations when we have very little education on the subject of addiction as a whole? Another big problem is when we're looking at this ballot question, we're not necessarily always looking at a drug problem, but we're also looking at a lifestyle change that's very important as well. It's not always about the drugs. When you're dealing with opiate addiction and treatment, the drug isn't the problem, it becomes a solution. And ultimately, the underlying issues are the real problem that needs to be treated. But in order to start treating those underlying issues, we need to detox the individual and remove the drugs from the equation long enough for that person to even understand how sick they truly are. And when we're dealing with, marijuana, with the intervention that we do in the intervention work we do in the state, one of the hardest interventions to do is for somebody who is struggling with addiction to marijuana, because ultimately they haven't suffered as many consequences. All of their friends typically are using as well. There's a big lifestyle component to it, but as people seem to be getting out of high school and start struggling with the societal pressures that are there today, it seems like we're dealing with a lot more depression than we have in the past. And I know there's been great data that's been shown today in terms of high school up to grade 12, but my experience dealing with more individuals between the ages of 18 and 26 is people are having difficulties finding jobs when they're getting out of school. A lot of people are struggling with financial burdens of student loans that they weren't prepared for. They were having higher expectations of being somewhere in their career that they typically aren't, as other generations have had more success. And they're very depressed, and they're dealing with that depression by self-medicating themselves by getting high, either smoking marijuana or drinking, and I think that also is something that just needs to be addressed. Just in my own personal experience, I think that it is important that if we have these types of community conversations, that they continue to happen, especially in the middle school level, because as these surveys have shown, that's such an important age to reach them. We've had some difficulties bringing these types of conversations into the middle schools because of resistance from communities that have these types of conversations with their middle schoolers, and I think that's a big problem that can change on the community level. Just by everybody kind of getting involved and being here tonight is important. In terms of what we're doing right now, we helped with a film called If Only with Jim Wahlberg. He's the director of the Mark Wahlberg Youth Foundation, and we've traveled to a lot of middle schools and shown the film during the day, and we also show the film at night to the families as well, to make sure we're creating an open dialogue between parents and their children and really having these conversations, and I think that is important, and that should continue on. And in terms of treatment in general, I think it's important that the information gets out there, that hope for those who are struggling is also that there is hope and people do recover and people do get better. And there's a lot of stigma, so if anybody in the room has someone who's struggling with a substance use disorder, to reach out and get help, not try to handle the situation within the family. That help is available. We have a hotline for Wicked Sober that's on wickedsober.com, so if anybody is looking for any additional information, we'd be more than happy to work with the family, give them information on resources that are available as well. So with that, I'm just going to keep it quick, and thank everybody for their time.
Thank you very much, Mike. We now have time for questions of people on the panel. If people have questions, we would welcome those in discussion. Yes.
Hi, I just had a question about the survey data. I know that we talked a little bit about sexual violence. Of the people surveyed, did you ask a question if any of them reported, or was that not addressed? Okay.
Good question, though. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could get that data from just like the police or whatever, but thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had a question about the survey. You mentioned the sample size, which seemed a decent sample size to think through things with, but you didn't mention the response rate. I wonder if you had at least some idea what that was, and if it wasn't pretty high, if you had any speculation on what the people that chose not to answer the survey might have been like. They probably weren't a random sample of the general population, and whether that could have biased the results down or up.
Sure. Well, when you do school-level survey research, when you want to get data for a school, usually you don't try to get a sample because you're not going to have the kind of data quality that you want. You usually try to go for a census. You try to survey everybody. And I don't have the enrollment numbers. I always check them before I prepare the survey reports. We weren't far off from having a full census of all the students. Now, you're going to miss some students who are absent on certain days. A few students, participation in the survey is optional, and parents have a chance to opt their kids out, but we don't lose too many kids through those mechanisms. So, we're lucky. The district does a really good job administering the survey, and we, usually get, 85, 90% of the students participating in the survey, so we have pretty good data quality.
Thank you for doing this tonight, and I just want to mention that I'm really glad that Mike is here, because I think that what the kids and the parents really do need to see is more recovering addicts and people that have their own stories to tell. And I know that you have that program. Are you planning on having that here in Winchester for the kids and the parents? I know you just did it in Stoneham.
Yeah. No, thank you. I mean, we're always willing to get involved with any community that invites us, in. And
it made a huge difference for the people in Stoneham when they showed the movie and Wahlberg was there, and they had 3 or 4 recovering addicts, and it just blew people's minds.
Yeah, I think it's a good conversation starter. The film is only 30 minutes, and I think that's important as well because it leaves time afterwards for a conversation also. But I think what's important, I think why I choose to share my own experience, obviously now I live in this town, my children, going to school in this town, and a lot of people would avoid to share kind of what I share about my own personal experience, but the reality of the situation is addiction does not discriminate. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. I grew up in a, pretty well-rounded Irish Catholic family from Arlington, Mass. But I was one of the top students in my class. I went to Bentley, one of the top business schools in the country. Ended up graduating after receiving treatment. Went back for my master's at Simmons in Boston. But the reality of the situation is there was a lot of access to drugs, especially prescription pain medication at that point. And one of my biggest fears is the increased access to marijuana as well, with the legalization of marijuana, where yes, it sounds great to be able to control this product, but ultimately I believe it's the exact opposite. I believe the easier access to it, you have children that brain isn't fully developed, where they're bigger at taking risks. I love contact sports. I was a 3-sport varsity athlete. I was already a higher risk because I had a genetic predisposition to addiction with my family. And given the right ingredients, it can be a recipe for success or disaster. And sometimes when you have, so much access to these types of drugs and availability to these types of drugs, somebody makes a poor decision one night, and that can ultimately set them on a path that leads to death, because that's what we're seeing. The people that have passed away, when I mentioned 1,500 people in the state of Massachusetts last year that passed away from accidental overdoses, these weren't what people sometimes think when they hear of somebody who died from an overdose. These are our neighbors. These are people from our communities. These are our children, our sisters, our siblings. My aunt just passed away recently from an overdose, and I don't know a family who isn't affected nowadays by addiction. So thank you for your thoughts, but I think that more conversations like this need to continue taking place, and we'll be happy to come to any school in Winchester to have the conversation as well, if that answers your question. Someone can email.
We did show the movie If Only in December. Actually, Mike was on the panel with a few other people that told their stories, and I think the stories do resonate, and that's important to keep doing. If we have a demand and we need to bring something like that, if you look in the booklet that we passed out, there's a number of programs that are going to be happening or have happened, and we will continue to address it.
Dot.
Oh, George?
George.
I'm George Gonzalez, middle school.
You don't need a microphone.
Please know that we work very closely with Doc Butler, Chris Russo, the Winchester Police, Fire Department, to bring programming to our students based on what is needed. We look at that YRBS data. We administer our own school climate survey data to our students. And based on dangers we feel are targeting our students with bring programs in. We brought Chris Karen in last year. Powerful program. We bring programs in every single year to our students. Of course, we will bring Mike. Of course. It's not even a question. It's about the timing and when you do it. Because whenever we bring a program into the call, it isn't a one-shot deal. What are you doing before the program? What are you doing after the program? And this comes with careful planning, collaboration, so that the message is heard and felt by the kids, and we can talk about it. Chris Heron came last year. We're planning projects this year from his presentation. So it's always about, planning things thoughtfully, deliberately, so it has the greatest impact.
And I think that was such a great point. And I think a lot of times what I've seen in other communities is they brought in speakers, but that was the beginning and the end of the work that was done. So I'm glad you made that point as well. It's important.
Yes.
I just want to recognize our new high school principal, Mr. Mahoney, because I just really, really appreciate his form of open communication, and I feel like he's a straight shooter and speaks about issues right when they're happening and doesn't sweep them under the carpet. And a few weeks ago, he contacted, I know all the high school parents, I know that it was posted on a Winchester Residents Facebook page as well. A parent put it on there. And I just really appreciate that, because this is an issue in our community, and we need to be open and face it and accept that, not take the attitude, not my child. It doesn't work that way. So.
2004? Oh, I remember. I didn't see him sitting there, so just right now.
And I remember when he broke his wrist. And when you're a coach in a locker room, you hear conversations, and you're teaching the classroom. You know kids who are at risk. Mike was not one of those kids. He broke his wrist, just a normal or a stand-up kid, and those prescription meds put him down a rabbit hole that I actually had not heard of. So this is a nice surprise, but a shocking surprise nonetheless. It's kids like Mike that I'm always thinking about, because we are working with the kids that we know who are at risk. But there's these other kids, a whole group of kids who you go down this rabbit hole prescription meds, you're trying something once to get hooked that you just don't even think it's going to happen to. Not my kid. It's not going to happen to Mike. It can happen to anybody. In terms of bringing the speakers, guest speakers, presentations, I think Mike, growing up, how many times in the middle school and the high school did you have the don't do drugs curriculum, don't do drugs speaker, this is what can happen to you? How often did that happen? Multiple times a year?
Yep, correct.
It doesn't stick. And that's not why I'm taking a different approach. These conversations are great because we understand them. We know that it's not going to happen to us because we're adults and we're mindful of, we're not 10 feet tall and bulletproof anymore. But the constant conversation between teachers and students, guest speakers and students, there's no stickiness. And we're trying to figure out a way to make sure that we do something that actually impacts them permanently, not just for that day. Chris Herron is one of the most powerful, amazing speakers I've ever seen. And I'd like to think that I've seen almost all of them in the last 15, 16 years. Kids walk out of there feeling uplifted. They feel like they're going to make good decisions. Next weekend, they're making the same decisions. So I don't want to depress anybody. I'm just saying I'm looking for a different way to attack the problem. I don't have the answer yet. But being forthcoming and kind of being very direct will be one of the ways that I do it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahoney. Yes, ma'am.
I sent you an email and thanked you for actually sending that email out about the Xanax, and also the email that you sent the students today about snitching not being, that whole situation. I will say to some of the kids, it was lost on them, but to the kids it was meant for, I think it's helpful. And I was wondering what the chief thought about the anonymous tip line. I know everyone here, well, you are, Mike, you're not, but mandated reporters. So what happens when you do get an anonymous tip, whether it's from a parent or from a student? How do you handle it? And then what is the best way to bridge the gap? I think that's why a lot of us are here, because of the principal's letters. How do we make the kids trust us enough, or the community enough, to come forward and say, okay, there is a problem, my friend's doing this, doing that, and sort of save their friend from also not losing their future?
Okay. Well, first let me say this with regard to Dennis Mahoney. I read both of those emails that he sent out to the high school parents, and I applaud him for doing that. Those were two of the best, most well-written messages that I've seen in quite some time.
All of the bonus sitting next to me, she's the assistant principal. She proofreads and edits everything.
Kudos to her. Woo.
With regard to the anonymous tip line, that's a valuable tool for the police department, and it's a valuable tool for the community. When we get a tip, and I should say also that the tip line isn't manned 24/7. It's usually, working hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, 9 to 5 is when someone's going to read it. And what we will routinely do is we'll respond to the anonymous tipster, and depending upon the information that anonymous tipster is providing us, we will, begin an investigation to determine how credible the information is. And this has happened a few times, if we get information from an anonymous tipper would more appropriately, we think they should maybe dial the police station to report it right at the time that the incident's occurring, we also let them know that. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, the Southern Campus principal who's willing to actually say that the system's not perfect in that case. And we're alive, and we have a lot of problems, and certainly restrictions on problems in the school is huge, and kids all know about it, parents now know about it. So how get kids, trust the administration, trust us, trust you, whatever that situation is, if they're caught with drugs, is there a way to somehow divert it to a peer group or some kind of a parent group?
To get the kids to understand that they should.
We now know we have our problem. We
Right.
know the elephant's out. You know, we're not avoiding it anymore. But and we don't have an answer. So what's the next step as a community that gets us to start working towards that? So I guess my idea would be, my question with the anonymous tip line was, as someone who's coached and taught before, I've had former students and kids come up to me and say, this is going on, what should I do? And I would say, if you tell me something, so I'm no longer actively practicing as an attorney, I have to tell your parents, or I have to, it's going to hurt you or hurt someone, I have to tell. But I want kids to still be able to come talk to me, and I want to be able to go to someone like your principal, but I know if I do that, it puts you in an interesting or a hard place, because I think in your letter you said not only is the punishment part of it, but also being empathetic, having some humility, but...
It doesn't. I mean, in school use, there's certainly punishment. If you came to me, so just to clear up a few things, I think Winchester is an amazing community, and I couldn't be happier to be here. The problem is that we're just not unlike any other community around. Everybody's got the same problem. Ours are no greater or lesser than anybody's. Teaching in Arlington, growing up in Burlington, living in Bedford, there's no difference in the amount of the problem. I'm just shining a light on it in this community. If we catch a kid in school using, yes, there's consequences. If a kid is at a party and the police come in, there will be MIA consequences, no school consequences. If somebody reports something to us, an anonymous tip, or says, hey, I have a friend and I think they have a problem, there will be no consequences in school. There'll be only support.
Do the kids know that? I mean, because I don't know if that's come across for kids. I think it's come across to us.
I think a lot of the kids know the MIA rules and getting caught for something in school. The kids, I need to be here for a while to earn credibility and trust. I don't think I've earned that yet. So it just takes time. And I don't know what the next steps are.
Are you open to something with like kids in the school being part of the process with you?
Absolutely. We are wary of there's always negative ramifications with kids reporting directly, unless they have a good friend that they want to help. So that's where the 01890 app is a two-step process, and it couldn't be easier to put on their phone. And every kid's got a phone for 99.9%. So that is probably the best route if they're not comfortable having a conversation with an adult, which that's maturity and trust, and it's different in every kid.
I'm Mark McDonough. I work at the high school as an adjustment counselor, but I'm a retired substance abuse counselor in 1982. And on that Friday, kids came forward and said, you guys got to do something. So-and-so's down there in a really bad shape. So kids look out for kids, staff look out for kids, and there is a network in the high school. There is a network in the community.
Oh, I know.
And
get a lot of calls.
And if it's, punishment is not the cure, and kids know that. And so we are active in treatment for those who need it. And it's very much like, the Angel program. You can get in trouble with the law for heroin addiction, or you can get help from the law for your heroin addiction. It depends on how you want to play it. And that's very much, I think, the message kids are getting. Dealing bad drugs in the high school, you've got to meet some bad consequences. Getting help for your friends, you're not going to have consequences, negative consequences. You're going to have positive consequences.
And the gentleman who had spoken previously has left about going with the law because the current law doesn't work. I can't look you in the eye and tell you I'm going to get a 15-year-old charged for smoking marijuana in school. The law doesn't work because I'm not going to ruin a kid's life for making a bad decision at 15. Even if that is the law, I can't do that to myself because I can't do it to the kid. I couldn't live with the ramifications of the rest of somebody's life at 15 years old for making a bad decision.
And I think that was my point.
Yeah.
That how do we get there together with our kids and you and so on.
Dan, do you want to speak to the follow-up on some of the tips? Because you're the one that gets them, though, aren't you?
Yeah, I get a lot of people on the tip line, but to go to what you were saying with the kids getting in trouble, and us being the police, and we're going in there arresting people, and killing their people.
Work with both of you.
No, I know, but we have a diversion program, and what it is kids get in trouble, they come in, we put them through the process that any normal adult would go through, going through the court system, except we make sure that they have a contract that's written up between the DA's office, the police, their parents, and they have to follow it. And if they don't, there's consequences at the end of it, which means those charges come forward. But if they do, it's gone. It's a clean slate, no record to follow, anything of that nature. So,
Yes, one more question.
Hello. I just want to also share with what Martha McDonough had shared. I'm Amber Haynes. I'm one of the adjustment counselors as well. And as a school district, we have an initiative to have the majority of our staff trained in recognizing mental health challenges with youth mental health first aid. And I just want to sort of point out with the Youth Behavior Risk Survey that there was mental health data in regards to also the substance abuse, which go hand in hand. And so I just think that it's great that Dennis and our school at the high school as well as the district are taking it seriously. You guys are here taking it seriously. And just from my limited experiences of being here for the last 3 years, is that students are coming forward. So they are recognizing that the struggle is there, and we are encouraging that referral. And we say, if you can't have your friend come alone, go with us. Go with us to the counseling. And I know today during lunch, the guidance department, we were having an active discussion about how many kids do come forward. And so they are, and we're there to listen, and we hope that you guys, if you see it and you say something, that you come to us so that we can work collaboratively with you all. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're just about at the point where we can excuse ourselves to go home and listen to the fate of the Republic, having dealt with the fate of the community. But I would just like to thank all of you for coming this evening. I would note that there are about 1,100 students in this building who will be here tomorrow morning. And while there's some comfort in the statistics and the percentages and the way in which the graphs go down, when you start to apply those percentages to the students who respond to the survey, that means there are just about 33 of us left here this evening. All of us would have used heroin in the last 30 days. So that's 33 students will be here tomorrow morning. Each will have used heroin in the last 30 days. That's 80 students who made a plan to commit suicide. The problems that face us are very serious and very substantial. We've been graced by Mr. Mahoney's service as our principal and had a great benefit of receiving his communication. I think the task for all of us, many of whom you are already active in solving these problems, is to now go out to the other 21,000 residents in our community, make sure that they see Mr. Mahoney's letter, make sure that they're aware of these issues, that we enlist more of our neighbors in trying to solve the problem, and that we all act together to defeat question 4. I'd like to thank Dr. Butler for her efforts, and thanks to our panelists, and thanks to all of you. Good night.